Right. Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you with another virtual event. Today, we're really excited to celebrate the release of Sherry Thomas's new Lady Sherlock book, Murder on Cold Street, which just came out today. We have copies available at the store. How are you tonight, Sherry?
I am doing well. How are you, John?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm sorry we can't do it in the store, but I'm glad we get to chat at least this way.
I know. I've been with you guys, going with you guys for like several years, right? So really miss a book tour can be like stressful and disorienting because you're moving through so many places so quickly all the time. The previous time I did a book tour, I think I was paranoid by the end of it that I would leave something behind. I was constantly checking my stuff. But this year I'm actually like, oh, wow, not doing it. I'm actually missing it a little bit.
Yeah, it's weird. We're so used to being able to get to see so many authors like you that we get to see at least once a year come through. And it's been weird. I think I was talking with Annalee Huber last night, and the last actual in-store event we had was with Deanna Rayburn, like in the middle of March.
That's right. She kind of like finished her book tour right before everything shut down.
Yeah, Penguin Random House had started calling, like they had basically canceled tours, and people that were out on the road, depending on how far they were in the tour, they were telling people like, no, you have to come home, or if they had a stop or two left that they were able to finish. And we were literally the last stop on the tour, and she was like, I can't miss Murder by the Book. So she was the last thing we had before it shut down. It's weird. We've had two other authors, Martha Wells, who lives up in College Station, and S.C. Perkins, who lives in Houston, have dropped by to socially distance sign some stock for us just because they were close. But those have been like the only authors we've had in the store for 7 months now, which is just crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. Yeah, I think the last in-store event I did was like back in December in Austin, just because some other friend had a book release and I went as part of the lineup. Yeah.
So we are here tonight to talk about, as I said, Murder on Cold Street, which is the fourth book in the series? Fifth book in the series. If you guys are watching on Facebook, if you have comments or questions, you can leave those for Sherry and I will relay those as we chat. But to get us started, Sherry, do you want to tell us a little bit about the new book?
Yeah, sure. So if I don't know why people who don't know these books will be maybe they just like seeing what Murder by the Book lives are like. But I write a series of gender-bending Sherlock Holmes books. In my books, the Sherlock character is a woman. Like, she's not Sherlock Holmes's daughter or lover or wife or anyone like that. She herself is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is her nom de plume, is her nom de guerre, I guess. And she's actually a fallen woman. She was disgraced by society and had to make her way on her own. And that was how her detective career started. So this is book 5, and book 4 ended on a tiny bit of a cliffhanger in which she got back from some escapades in France, only to learn that gosh, I haven't talked for so long that all the nouns are deserting me. A Scotland Yard inspector who is her friend and who has worked with her before has now been arrested on suspicion of murder. And his wife shows up like asking for her help. And so that was the end of the previous book. So this book picks up basically the second the previous book ended, and to dive directly into this murder case of why this police officer was caught in a room with 2 dead men.
So you mentioned, people joining that may or may not be aware of the series. One of the benefits of kind of the virtual events is people don't have to get in the car and drive, so they can just be in the living room and check out, hey, what's going on? So do you recommend, if somebody is new to the series, do you think they can jump in with this one, or do you think that they should go back and start with studying Scarlet Women?
Personally, I would recommend they start from the beginning because this each book can be read on its own. Since this book just came out today, I read a couple of reviews where people just started the book with the series with this one, but they do say that, after they read it, they're little, they wish they had, they're going to jump back to book one so they can understand the interpersonal relationships better. The mystery stands on its own, but the relationship, it has a recurring cast of characters, and it has a slow simmering romance. So all that is best experienced from the beginning. It's kind of like, I think once upon a time, your mystery novels featuring the same detective used to be completely standalone, right? It doesn't matter which book you pick up. It's Poirot was always Poirot and Miss Marple was always Miss Marple. But in the age of peak TV, your detectives also change and grow, and they are slightly different people in book 5 than they were in book 1.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how kind of that part of series has changed since like kind of the golden age. Like you said, a lot of those like Miss Marple, like you knew what you were going to get each book, and you could just pick one up. And it's great now. I think most writers now try to make, like you said, kind of the plots definitely kind of stand on their own, so that way you can pick it up and like you're able to solve this mystery, but it leaves you kind of wondering about the characters and wanting to go back to see what their earlier adventures were. So
that's what one hopes.
Yeah. So what drew you to create a gender swapped Sherlock Holmes? Were you a Sherlock fan before you started writing these?
Yeah, I was not a fangirl kind of fan, but I was a general fan, and I read the Sherlock Holmes books when I was I first read the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and those stories when I was quite young, maybe before I turned 10, definitely before, in my preteen years when I was living in China. So I read them in translation in Chinese. But actually, one of the things that always made a strong impression on me was the Sherlock Holmes pastiche. Pastiche is a term that's used for Sherlock Holmes story written by people other than Arthur Conan Doyle himself. And so as I was reading the original Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, I also read the 7% Solution, which is actually one of the most famous of the pastiche stories. I read that in Chinese also. I read it in a tent. I remember it very clearly. I was an athlete, and we were at an athletic meet, and so the athletes were putting little tents. So I was lying on this mat, waiting for my turn, as a long jumper, and waiting for my event, and I was just lying on the tent, reading the 7% Solution. And so as I got older and came to the US, I think I didn't do that much Sherlockian stuff, but then I came across The Beekeeper's Apprentice by Laurie R. King. And when I read it, I was so astonished. That was the first Holmesian writing, first pastiche that really made me think, oh, wow, I wish I could write like this. But this was a long time ago. This was in 2005. And I was like, I'll just keep writing romances for a while. But then the BBC Sherlock came out. And that's also a wonderful adaptation. And that was when I actually decided, yes, I am going to try it. And since Laurie R. King already gave Sherlock Holmes a equally Sherlockian partner, female partner, and since the BBC Sherlock already brought it into the 21st century, and since the CBS series Elementary already made Watson a woman, I was like, the only thing left to do is to make Sherlock a woman. So that's where I went with that. And
if you guys are watching, I just dropped a link to Beekeeper's Apprentice in the Facebook chat. We're huge fans of Laurie's. We did an event with her and Les Klinger, who's also a huge Sherlockian, earlier in the pandemic. And it's available on the Facebook feed and also through YouTube. I actually just read a really cool Sherlock pastiche called, oh my gosh, it just went out of my head.
It's a pandemic. It's a disappearance of nouns. Yeah.
The Angel of the Crows by Catherine Addison, where it's set in Victorian London, but Sherlock Holmes is an angel and Watson is potentially a hellhound werewolf. And it's
that is so cool.
Yeah, it's crazy because in it, like the angels, they're not from our world, but they're really observant, and it really is kind of a really cool way to explain that way that like Sherlock can look at something and just know like, oh, there's dust on your shoes, so you've been in like these 16 places. It was a really fascinating concept. So when you knew that you were going to start this series, did you go back and reread any of the original Sherlock stuff from Doyle?
Not as much as you would think. Only when it comes time to I think I reread A Study in Scarlet. Mm-hmm. I reread A Study in Scarlet, and I skimmed through The Sign of the Four, and I may have read or skimmed some other stories, but no, I don't think I like reread them very, very closely, because what I was writing, although was inspired by the original canon, is so different. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes when I'm rereading, I'm actually looking for like the little historical details rather than how the character was written or how the story went. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of the original Sherlock stories or novels?
Favorite of the original? I mean, it's hard not to like A Scandal in Bohemia, mm-hmm. Which was one of the best. And I feel like I mean, the odd thing is I first read them as a child, mm-hmm. and then going back to read them, and I go, he was actually setting a lot of stuff in America, mm-hmm. a place he actually didn't know a lot about. Yeah. Like you read his depiction of what's going on in America, and you think about what's really happening in America, and you go like, as a foreigner, right? To give a sense of exoticism. So yeah, I'm going to go with A Scandal in Bohemia.
So Catherine in the comments asks, is there a lot of research involved in writing each novel?
Mine. Yes, there typically is a lot of research involved, but I have been writing books set in the 1880s, 1890s for a long time. So I have a general background on what's on what happens and what is done, what isn't done, and kind of general layout of the geography. So other than that, with each story, whatever comes up, I research. So for example, Murder on Cold Street is set right before Christmas. So this is a very Christmassy book. So I actually, was researching what kind of decorations the Victorians had, and they had some crazy decorations. They kind of threw everything on the tree, and also, for example, in this book, the person in trouble, his name is Inspector Treadles, and Mrs. Treadles is the daughter of a great industrialist who just inherited her father's holdings, because her brother, who used to manage them, also died. And so even throughout most of the writing, I was just referring to these factories very casually, until my critique partner said, hey, this is a crucial point in the story. You can't just not tell me what these factories look like, what they actually do, what is she even making, So I was so deep into revision, I was like, please, can you, since you care so much about this, can you find some stuff for me? And my goodness, she rose to the occasion, because I think she has a subscription to a newspaper archives in the UK. So she could go directly to the source and go to newspaper articles in the 1880s and 1890s, and she pulled up so many of them. So in the end, we settled on things that manufactured boilers, and some were engines, and some were basically locomotive parts. Mm-hmm. So I was basically magnifying those PDF files as big as I could, so I could read what the heck those industrialists from out of town were touring in London, in Leeds, in all those other places. And they were given fascinating details.
So it sounds like you potentially kind of get the writing done first and then go back and then kind of fill in whatever research you need as you go along. Is that, would you say that's accurate?
Yes. I tend to do that because I have noticed that if I spend a lot of time researching first, I actually tend to use less of the research or not at all, because I will only be doing that if I cannot actually get on with the book. There's something actually wrong with the story. That's why I might feel like I'm doing something productive by just, digging these very deep tunnels into research. Yeah. So much easier to get the story settled and then to fill in the details later to make it more historically vivid.
So before you did the Lady Sherlock books, you were writing some romance novels. So what made you make the jump from romance to mystery?
I guess partly it was because I think there are two kinds of writers. There are writers who have a super strong core story. Mm-hmm. They're always drawn to the same story, like, and I wish I were one of those writers, because I happen to be on the other end of the extreme in that as soon as I've written something, I go like, I don't want to write that again. And there are only so many core romantic variations, I think. So by the time I've written by the time I've written like 5 or 6 romances, I already thought I was running out of ideas. My agent convinced me not to quit. So then I pulled a couple of old manuscripts from under the bed and rewrote them. So they turned out to be books 8 and 9 of my historical romance career. But what was book 7, the last original story I wrote, that was an amnesia story. And I very strongly feel if you are reaching for the amnesia plot, it's time to take a break. You have no more fresh ideas. So that's when, and that was also when I had the Sherlock, the Lady Sherlock idea. I wanted to give that a try. So it worked out.
Is there anything that you think that romance writers could learn from writing mystery fiction, or mystery writers could learn from the romance genre?
Oh, well, I think it's to the advantage of every writer. It doesn't matter what you write. I think it's to the advantage of every writer to learn something from romance, because romance is character driven. And this day and age, I think what draws people in the most is the characters, character interaction and all that. Even if you look at something with a huge plot like Game of Thrones, right? They basically spent 2 seasons just talking and establishing characters. So, and people are invested in the world because of the character, because they were invested in the characters. And also, no matter what you're writing, if you can slide in a good romance into it, you get a lot of romance readers who are willing to slog through whatever else you may be writing to have a romance. Yeah. So, and as for what romance writers could learn from mystery writers, I have said this one time, and I don't know how accurate it is, but I'm going to give it a go. In a mystery, your case is always changing, right? As you first go in, you think this is what's happening. As new clues are revealed, you say, no, actually, that's what's happening. And then you sometimes have reversals. Sometimes you have, people who you think have been cleared turn out not to be cleared at all. So the case you're investigating, the nature of it is actually changing as you discover more and more. I think if romance writers could treat their unfolding relationship like a mystery, in which as the nature of the relationship, as they get closer, as the nature of the relationship change, their interaction also change, that will make you write a better romance too, rather than people are arguing about the same thing at the beginning, middle, and end of the book. So yeah, that's all the advice I have.
No, that's interesting. I think it's also interesting too, kind of going back series wise, how romance novels tend to, like, if it's a series, it's more of a shared world than it is, it might be like the couple from this book are the main characters, and then there's like a secondary character who then becomes like the hero or the heroine of the next one. I think it's interesting how romance series build that way as well.
Well, that's because the only way for to have story, you must have conflict. To have a new story, you must have new conflict. So that's why, for example, I never really liked the subsequent Bridget Jones books as much, because it would require something to happen for her and the Mark Darcy characters to break up or to have trouble. Whereas, it kind of ruins the effect of the first book, which is so nice and gives you such a great feeling. You don't want these people to have troubles that cause them to break up and go apart, and for them to be with other people for a while and then come back. So that kind of like it undermines the work they did in the first book. So that's why in romances, typically you don't have the same people having more story just because,
And it's, I imagine hard to create kind of that tension and that feeling of suspense when at the end, if it's the second book with the same characters and it's romance, like they're going to get together at the end because they have to, or it's technically not a romance novel and you will get angry letters.
Yeah, or it kind of makes subsequent happy endings less believable. If another book is coming, you go, oh, something's going to go wrong again.
Yeah, and at some point you're just like, oh, they would be better off to split. Yeah. So we've got another question from the crowd. Catherine says, you have really wonderful covers. Do you have any input on the titles of the books or the covers?
Yes. My publisher actually always asks me, do you have any idea what you want to call these books? So I think I've named all these books.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have named all these books. Like the first book, A Study in Scarlet Women, was my working title. And then they said, actually that might be too cerebral or something. They said, we'll look for a new one. I was like, sure, go ahead, because marketing always, have final say over over titles and such. And so we had them, so I was really surprised when the first iteration of the cover came. And it still said A Study in Scarlet Women. And I said, oh, so we're not finding another one, but I wasn't going to complain about that. As for the cover, yeah, we've had a lot of input because I'm not sure why we had a lot of input. They kept asking, so we kept giving. For example, the first book was where we had a lot of back and forth. And they had a woman standing in front of a building. It ended up being that way too. But in the first few iterations, we're just like, something is not happening. This woman is just standing there. The building is kind of darkish and the door is closed and she's just standing there looking kind of helpless and lost, like she doesn't know what to do. And because neither my agent nor I are graphic artists, we don't know what to do either. We can only say something needs to happen. There needs to be more this or more that. We don't know what that is. We need to have more oomph. And then the final draft came and we were so happy because as soon as they didn't do much, but they opened the door of the house. They opened the door of the house to have, light leaking out. And so now there's a sense of mystery, what's going on inside the door. And the woman, Charlotte Holmes on the cover, instead of standing there with her hands out by her side, now is reaching in. So now you have a story, you have movement, you have momentum, you have mystery on the cover. So then suddenly, yeah. So we have had a fair bit of input into these books.
Well, I'm glad they kept the title for the first one, Study in Scarlet Women, because I think it's a perfect title. I think you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get Sherlock Holmes. There's going to be a fallen woman in there. I think the title's perfect, and I'm glad they kept it the way they did. We also had a question about coming up with Charlotte's Christmas dress.
Oh, yes. Oh, has somebody already read the book?
Yeah, so Kristen says that you come up with Charlotte's Christmas dress.
I came up with Charlotte's Christmas dress actually in the previous book. In the previous book, I had put her in a dress like that. And because Charlotte has, I'm not sure where it came from that she has a completely over-the-top sense of fashion. But ever since the first book, it has been so. She has an over-the-top sense of fashion, and she likes it, and she enjoys it, and she actually looks good in it, despite looking sometimes wacky. So it's been a great pleasure for me to, in every book, try to see how I could outdo my previous book in what I could put her in. And so the previous book was set just like the week before this one, so it was also kind of like Christmas season. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if she had kind of like a, you know, or maybe I saw this pattern as the applique somewhere. I don't remember what. I may have seen it as an applique online. I was just like, oh, that's perfect dress for Charlotte, like a skirt, like a pine cone, and with candles, embroidered on the skirt. So yeah, but the previous book in that scene, I thought that dress was a little too much. It already had plenty going on, so I pulled it out of that, and so I was not going to let my work go to waste. So that this book started with her in that dress.
So what kind of research do you do to figure out the fashions that she's going to wear?
Oh, it's actually much easier than it used to be. Now I just need to like go on Pinterest, and there are a lot of people who pin 1880s, 1890s fashions. Of course, I need to double check. I need to double check against what I already know. I also have a proper old-timey research book, English women's fashion in the 1880s. So I double check against that to make sure that is what they were wearing in that age. And sometimes I look at what cosplayers are doing, because there are people who sew their own Victorian outfit, and they are very knowledgeable about how to build this, how to build their outfit, all the underpinnings and each layer, that what happens, the construction. So I look at that, and I look at everything for things such as clothes.
So when you're working on something and you're kind of doing historical research, how do you know at what point, this fascinates me about historical fiction authors, how do you know at what point do you think, okay, I can fudge this and I can kind of get away with not being 100% historically accurate? And how do you know like when you want to be 100% historically accurate?
I think there's a lot of gray area what history doesn't record. So I feel like if history didn't record it, I can play with it. If history does have hard and fast records, then better go with that. So for example, I have written more than one female doctors set in the Victorian era. That's because the first Victorian female doctors started practicing quite a while before the setting of my book. But I remember one time I was like, hey, how about I write a Victorian lady lawyer? No, that didn't happen until well after the turn of the 20th century, so I couldn't do that. But between that area, there's a lot of, who is to say that a woman never dressed up as a man and did stuff? We have actually recorded, records of like men who turned out to be women, who have pretended to be men for years. So anything I can say to myself, no one can prove this is untrue. That is my playground. Everything else, I try to go with what's happening, so that to give it even better. If you make your the general setting of your book more historically accurate, I think you can get away with more on the plot side.
I chatted with Anna Lee Huber last night, and she basically kind of said the same thing. She said, like, when she's doing her research, if it's something that she, who is used to this era and knows where to find things, if she can't find info on that, then probably other people can't either.
Exactly. Yeah. So I sometimes ask myself, how good is my Google food, and how good is other people's Google food? If I can't find this, who's going to put in more time than I do to find?
And then our general disclaimer that we always give when we're at the bookstore too. At the end of the day, it's all still fiction. So even if it's not correct, you're not writing like historical nonfiction here. It's all
right. Although it is kind of you feel kind of you feel kind of deflated when you realize you have made an actual historical mistake, which is why sometimes I used to say I check every noun, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Like I had mentioned something to do with hydrogen. No, not hydrogen, helium. And the thing was, Victorians were great chemists, but helium was isolated after I'd written that particular book. This was, and one reader wrote in about it. And ever since that, I was like, why did I know this about helium?
I can't remember. I think maybe it was like C.S. Harris in one of her like author notes even said something like, hey, I realized that this didn't happen until like a month after I placed it in the book but for plot reasons, I needed it to happen here. So I've just fudged this and, you know, and you're just, I think it was her, and was basically just like, I fudged this, you're just gonna have to deal with it. So I have two similar questions in the comments. Chrissy asks if you have where'd it go? If you have an end game in mind for the series, and Jean also kind of going with that, wants to know if there are going to be more books in the series.
Yes, there will be more books in the series. When people used to ask me how many books do you envision in the series, I always used to say 10. Well, book 5 is out, and books 6 and 7 are under contract. Usually, publishers don't give you contracts for 10 books. So at this moment, I am fairly confident to say that if there's a big story arc, and this is definitely a story with a bigger overarching story arc, we are right around the halfway point, perhaps a little short of the halfway point. Maybe book 6 is the actual halfway point. As for what the end game is, I don't even know exactly how book 6 is going to end. I just have a general idea. And yet, because I'm the kind of person who have no idea what's going to happen later in the book, it has actually made me write a tighter story in these current 5 books, because since I don't know what's going to happen in the future, I tend to look at what already happened and see what they would tell me about where this book is, where the series is going. I wish I know what the end game is, but I kind of trust that I go into most books like this. I don't exactly know what is going to happen. I trust that I'll figure out along the way. So I'm also trusting that I will figure out along the way. Maybe by the time book 9 rolls around, I'll be better equipped to tell you what happens in book 12. But we're only, at book 6.
So have you ever gotten kind of far into a book, kind of hoping that you're going to figure things out, and then, get to the end of it and have not figured out where it's going to go yet, or does it all kind of always fall in place for you?
No. You actually, I don't know how other people do it, but I actually cannot not know the ending of a story for too long. Like, it's almost never past. I can almost never write past 20% of a book without knowing something very, very significant about the ending. So, for example, in book 6, I started writing book 6, and I was like, I'm not sure what the heck I'm doing in book 6. Until suddenly one day I go, oh, this is what she's gonna find out. Not the other thing. This is what she's gonna. Then suddenly I am much more interested in book 6. So if that hadn't happened at that point, I would have written a couple more thousand words, and I would have to stop. I would just need time for everything to sink in, for my subconscious to tell me where exactly is this going. So I would like readers not to worry.
So Jean wants to know, what other mystery writers do you read and like?
For example, I definitely love Laurie R. King. I think there are a ton of great historical mysteries featuring lady sleuths, Deanna Raybourn, Annalie Uber, and Bella Ellis, who writes the Bronte sisters as detectives. And I also very, very much enjoy Louise Penny. She is one of my favorites. And I think it was after I read her books. I read her books before I started writing my mysteries. It was after I read her books that I thought to myself, oh, okay, I am also going to build a community, because her community is what I come back for. I actually almost don't even care about what cases Inspector Gamache has to solve. I just want to be with those people again.
Yeah, when I first started working at Murder by the Book, she was one of the first. I'd read Deanna Raybourn, and I had read some historical mystery stuff, but I wasn't as well versed in the genre as I probably should have been getting hired at a mystery bookstore. But Louise Penny's were one of the earlier ones that one of the booksellers put in my hand, and they were one of the first ones where I kind of realized like you said, kind of it's all about the character development and how you can kind of create that sense of community. And she kind of really helped open up the genre for me as a
because her a lot of her stories take place in this tiny village in Quebec, right? So tiny it's not even on the map. And so you think there's like a murder happening every few months in this village. Yeah. Like in a real life setting, people would have like skied out of there, all the rest of them. And yet, you know, life goes on in this village and you can't wait to get back into this fictional life in that village.
Yeah, I always said if you wanted to visit Three Pines, because you read the first book and you want to visit Three Pines, you're always fine as long as you don't do it near a holiday, because those first like 4 books, it was always right around a holiday, somebody would get murdered. So you have to do it on like a random Tuesday when nothing's going on and you would be fine.
Don't live there.
Yeah.
People passing through are okay.
Let's see, Andrea says that she loves the sense of humor in the books. She loves when Charlotte has to cut back on sweets. So Chrissy says, is it difficult coming up with the plots? Is it intimidating because it's kind of Sherlock Holmes? Does that intimidate you at all?
It is intimidating in concept, but the good thing is I have a year to do it. I don't know whether anybody in the audience has ever watched Jonathan Creek, which is a British detective show featuring a guy who the lead detective is kind of like, well, he's like an amateur detective because he does not what his profession. His profession is he's a stage magician's engineer. He's the one who come up with the illusions. Mm-hmm. So that puts him like in a good kind of frame of mind, skill set to solve some puzzling mysteries. And the series has not aged too well. It carries a lot of attitude from, you know, the when it was made. But I remember at the time I was reading it and I was reading about people who wrote it. I was like, how did they come up with these ingenious? And they basically, the people answered, well, we needed several months to think it over and to like, that's how. The only reason Sherlock Holmes appears a genius is because he figures out right away. You give most of us a year, and we can also do something about it.
Do you think that kind of the prevalence of kind of the more recent Sherlock pastiches and like films like the Robert Downey Jr. ones, like you mentioned, Elementary and kind of the BBC Sherlock, do you think kind of all of those other different ideas of Sherlock that we have in our head has made it easier for you to kind of take it and run with it on your own?
Yeah, definitely. I did enjoy the 1980s version. The British, the BBC did a version in the 1980s with, I can't quite remember the guy's name, but he when I think of Sherlock Holmes, classic Sherlock Holmes, his still the face that comes to mind. And I actually watched that in Chinese translation on Chinese TV when I was still a child. And I have always loved the pastiche, Sherlock Holmes pastiche, like other people's interpretation of Sherlock Holmes actually better than the original. I know it's probably not kosher to say that, but that's how because I love to see how different people's take on the original character. So in that way, I feel like I can both stay true to the original and not have to like be slavish in my devotion to the original.
So going along with that, if you guys are watching, I don't know if y'all are familiar, a couple of years ago, there was a big lawsuit about whether or not the Sherlock books could become public domain because they were up for kind of the copyright issues. And the verdict ended up being that some of the stories were public domain and some of them were specifically copyrighted. So is that something that you have to be cognizant of when you're working, or is it because, or since it's a pastiche, is everything kind of free game for you?
Asked about that this past summer. I was actually asked about that this past summer about, hey, is your I think it's because Enola Holmes, the author of Enola Holmes, and Netflix were sued recently, and so I was asked, and the verdict was something like there are only very few Sherlock Holmes stories left that are still under copyright. And I think the author, I don't want anybody to quote me on this because I read this month ago. And I think the author was sued because her Sherlock Holmes was a more humane Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the Arthur Conan Doyle estate argued that it was precisely in those last few books that was still in the not in the public domain that he became more humane. And I was like, I don't have such a problem, because in my book there's no Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes does not exist in my book, so I was like, I'm good. And whoever asked me that obviously also thought that was a good enough answer.
Sounds good to me. So have you watched Enola Holmes yet?
I just did it a couple of days ago.
Yeah. Did you enjoy it?
I did. I thought it was really charming, and the Sherlock Holmes really is like the most likable Sherlock Holmes I've seen ever, in like most likable male Sherlock Holmes I've ever seen.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. It's on my thing to get to this week. But we've been huge fans of Nancy Springer's books for years, so we were so excited to see that finally something was coming from it. So Sam asks in the comments, do you think you'll ever get to England or London?
Do I think I'll ever visit England or London? I have visited England a couple of times. Let's see. And this will tell you all you need to know about me, what kind of person I am, in that I was like a mile away from the Sherlock Holmes Museum, and I was too lazy to walk that mile to go there because I was headed in the opposite direction to do something else. And the reason I didn't was because I cannot actually see the real Sherlock Holmes apartment, or this is what somebody subsequently built. It was fictional. It never existed. So I didn't feel like I have to pay homage to that. But otherwise, I have been to England a couple of times, and it's nice to actually visit a country house to actually see the scale of it. But otherwise, I feel like whatever I see is present day England. You know, I am not seeing Victorian England. To see Victorian England, I still have to visit books, the original material and from the 19th century and things like that.
So before, or actually not that long ago, you also did a book called The Magnolia Sword, which was a retelling of the Ballad of Mulan. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was just wondering, when the heck did I become a retelling specialist? That actually came about because that was not my idea. That was not my idea. I mean, the book was entirely my idea, but the idea to write a Mulan retelling was not mine at all. I was just, living my life, and one day my agent shot me an email and said, I had lunch with Cheryl Klein, who used to be Harry Potter's continuity editor in the US, but has now moved to Lian Lo Books, which is a publisher that specializes in diverse books. And she wants to turn them slightly more commercial. And seeing that the live action Mulan is coming up, seeing that there has never been a YA retelling of the original Ballad of Mulan in the US, she's looking for an author to do it. Are you interested? I think my first reaction was I laughed so hard because, the idea never occurred to me in my whole life. Like, I was just laughing out of surprise. And then I thought, maybe I am not such a wrong person to do it, because obviously I grew up in China, so I'm fluent in the culture. And then I actually went and read the original Ballad of Mulan, which is like very few characters and says nothing at all about her time in the military, other than it was cold and they were riding around a lot. So then I thought, okay, to actually expand this into an 80,000 word novel, I'm going to have to actually come up with a real plot, real people, and all that. So because I am a huge fan of wuxia, which is a very uniquely Chinese genre of literature, in which everybody is a almost superhumanly adept martial artist. And so it's kind of like Chinese fantasy when I was growing up. So then I asked the publisher, could I infuse this with some martial arts element? and make her already a trained martial artist, and bring over some other frequently used plot points from wuxia, from martial arts epics. And she's like, sure, let's go ahead. So we were like, let's write it. And that's what happened. And what followed was like the most difficult book I've ever written. It was seriously the most difficult book I've ever written. I used to always say that my critique partner is extremely, extremely tough, like very unforgiving, would tell you every fault there is. And when I was writing this book, when I was working with Cheryl, who is a wonderful editor, but oh my goodness, that I thought to myself, of that line from the last Lord of the Rings movie, like every single step of your life has led to this point. I was like, my 10 years of training under my unforgiving critique partner is the only thing that prepared me for working with Sherlock. But I'm so glad I worked with her, because I'm so happy with how the book turned out.
So did you approach doing that retelling kind of the same way that you approach doing a Sherlock retelling, or was it kind of a completely different process?
All I can say is, after I wrote Mulan, everything else doesn't seem so difficult. No, I mean, the book Sherlock just came out was like, felt like banging my head into the wall. But I just have to remember back to Mulan, which my editor said she read 20 times. And I believe her, because by the end of which I couldn't even read that book anymore. I would just read wherever she says, there's some things that need to be changed. I could not read that book anymore. So compared to that, regular book writing, it's just banging your head into a regular wall. But writing Mulan was like banging your head into a wall that has nails sticking out of it. So yes.
So you're saying getting to go back to Charlotte was a nice, happy experience then?
Book 6, yes. Book 5, I was still exhausted, believe it or not.
So for book 6, is that going to be kind of same time next year, October of next year?
Yeah, we hope so. We hope so. My editor, my Lady Sherlock editor, who is really too nice, finally put her foot down as to when I'm supposed to turn these books in. Because we signed contracts years ago, and the contract set a date, and we were like, we never meant that date. So the book, always just ended up being written whenever they were being written. And I was so exhausted this previous year that, I kept thinking, who's going to give me a deadline? Nobody's giving me a deadline, like a hard putting their foot down. Take a break for another day. So this year they finally said, you have to, hand it in on, first draft on November 15th. And I'm actually, doing pretty good work.
So how has kind of the pandemic / state of the world been for you, kind of as creatively as a writer? Have you felt blocked? Have you been able to just kind of sit down and get it done?
I have not felt blocked. I am in the fortunate position in that my work was always done at home anyway. So the pandemic actually hasn't changed very much my day-to-day life. And we writers are sometimes rather extraordinary introverts. So it's almost like we've been training our whole lives for just never leaving our houses again. And I'm not sure whether it's going to come out in the writing, but I have felt that sometimes there's a slight sense of unreality as my days go by, as if I'm not sure whether this year counts. I'm not sure whether what I'm doing is real, but otherwise I am in fairly decent shape mentally and physically and all that. So to be able to say that, my mom has suffered from insomnia for months until she finally figured out from some minor panic attack that she's actually having anxiety issues. So seeing people around me having trouble with the situation has made me feel very fortunate to mostly be able to work and live without much additional problem.
So Mary asks, will there ever be a story about Sherlock's sister that requires a caregiver?
I am not sure because she is not going to, I assume you mean not as a protagonist because she cannot do much for herself. You mean, would there ever be a plot line that involves her more strongly? It is possible. Like I say, I don't know what's going to happen in books beyond book 6. I'm not even sure what book 6 is going to, in book 6, she will not play a strong role, but yeah, I always feel like I don't introduce characters for no reason. If they stick around long enough, their purpose become apparent. Yeah.
And so we've talked that you've done romance, you've done mystery. Is there any other genre that you feel like you might be itching to tackle at some point?
I've also written fantasy. I've written a fantasy series, so I've done that. And I don't know. From time to time, I think about writing a slightly more literary novel, but I've read 2 literary novels in my whole life. So that is really like slightly unseemly ambition.
It's always funny whenever I pick up a more literary novel and I'm reading it, I'm so used to reading like mysteries or fantasy. Even sometimes I have an issue with some of the more epic fantasy stuff because, you know, mystery is so, I mean, it's character driven, but it's also so plot driven. I joke with my husband all the time. He was trying to get me to read Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn books, and they're like 800 pages long. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like 300 pages into this book and nothing has happened yet. And he's like, it's fantasy. You can't expect it. I'm like, if I was reading a mystery, they'd be like solving the crime, or I'd be like 50 pages into the second book of the series already. So that's always kind of how I feel a little bit when I pick up a literary novel too. I'm like, when's somebody going to get murdered? When's the plot going to start happening?
Yeah, but I have to say, of the few, very few,
yeah.
In fact, I'm not even sure how many literary, like I know one is definitely, so of the few literary novels I've read, there was one that I really enjoyed. So
yeah,
maybe.
Awesome. So if you guys joined us late, we have been talking with Sherry Thomas. Her newest book, Murder on Cold Street, just came out today. It is the 5th book in her Lady Sherlock series. If you missed the beginning of the chat, Facebook will archive it so that when we're done, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning. We'll also be uploading it to the store's YouTube channel in the next couple of days, so you can watch it there or share it if you know anybody that might enjoy hearing her talk about the book, but is potentially not on Facebook. As we mentioned, this is the 5th book in the series. It came out today. We've got it in stock. If you are interested in starting from the beginning, the first one is Study in Scarlet Women, and we have those available as well. We are still doing curbside pickup Mondays through Thursdays at the store, and we're available for appointments on Fridays and Saturdays, and you can book those through the store website. Sherry, thank you so much for doing this evening.
It's been so much fun. Thank you, John.
Yeah, we definitely miss having you in the store, but it's great that we were at least able to connect and get to chat about the new book this way, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that this time next year when the next one comes out, we
Yes. I hope to see you much sooner rather than later.
Yeah, yes. Definitely. Have a good evening. Take care.
You too. Bye, and thank you everybody for joining us.